I've been up here a couple of times this year, and I just love the community, and as it's grown over the last 7 or 8 months since the beginning of the year has just been amazing. My background, Daniel didn't mention, but I'm actually a high school science teacher by profession, so I went to uni, did advanced science and education for a number of years, and then went out and taught. And the reason I actually became a teacher, my passion was actually, if you've heard my story, my passion was in visual art, so I did art exceptionally well, and I happened to be exceptionally gifted in science as well, more so in the area of chemistry and biology. And I remember my father sitting me down at the end of year 10, and he said to me, don't pursue this art thing because you only make money from that when you're dead, as all professional artists usually do. So go and focus on science and go and get a real career and a real job. So I did that and studied science. I soon realised that I wasn't built to sit in a lab and look down a microscope for my whole entire existence. I'm a real people person. I love being around people. I love learning from people. And I remember Daniel just, off the cuff, as he often makes these comments, and they're like light bulb moments for me, but they're just comments that he throws. And he goes, why don't you go and, become a teacher? And that way later when we're married, you can, be at home and look after them during the school holidays. Now, mind you, he hadn't proposed, but the man had vision. So I said, that's a great idea. So that's how I became a teacher. So I don't know how you kind of chose your field and where you've ended up coming through your life journey. But yes, he did marry up, and I married well. So there's our story. Oh, and we've got 2 boys in common. So yeah, that didn't happen on my own. I'm not that great. So Anthony, who's 10, and Christian, who's 7. And I have people that look forward to hearing when Pat's on the agenda, because often I talk about things that are just everyday life. I tend to draw a lot of my talks, and I try to make it so that if you are in business or if you're a professional, there is something you can take off, so it's not just a feel-good feeling. So I'll come to that in a sec. But tonight's talk, I was having a very interesting discussion with my 7-year-old last week, who is going on 27. And my sister's in the room, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about. She's his godmother. And I'm laughing because I'm just hearing the story. Anyway, he was playing on his technology, as all 7-year-olds do, live and breathe by. And I told him, okay, that's enough, you've been on it for long enough, off you go. And then he looks at me and he goes, you know what? When I grow up and I have children, I'm going to let them play on technology all day long, and I'm going to be a better parent than you. And I said, yeah, I remember telling your grandmother the same thing. Who here remembers having a very similar, if not the same conversation with their parent? I would never do that to my children, what you've done to me. And then I got to thinking, that's a great topic that I should share on Monday night. So tonight's discussion is the power of generations. And what I want to unpack with you tonight is, how have we come to evolve generationally? Sure, there are some similarities. Sure, there are some definite differences. But what I want to share with you tonight is, what are some of the differences amongst the generations that we are living and breathing amongst, and more importantly, how do we deal with that in everyday situations? So I'm going to really unpack that. So, I've got here, even though we are basically the same, we're made up of the same genetic material, clearly we're not the same as our parents. Clearly our children are not the same as us. And what's really interesting is, if you study, and in preparing for this talk, I actually did quite a bit of research. So I was looking at some journal articles and some long-term surveys that were conducted. And what they were showing is, it's the environment that surrounds us that pretty much determines how we end up shaping as far as our character traits. And if you were to take a look at the history of time, there were certain periods of time or pockets of time where economics and social status and cultural changes shaped those pockets of time. And then as a result, those pockets have mirrored generations. Does that make sense? And so what's interesting is, if you take a look at the generations, there's pretty much 4 that I want to share with you tonight, but I really want to focus just on the bottom 3. So the veterans, these are the generations that were pretty much prior to the war, and they now date 70 years and over. And then you've got the baby boomers, who pretty much historically were the largest segment of our society. And this is what happened after the war. All the soldiers came back from war, and all of a sudden they had missed their partners unbelievably. And as a result of that longing, there was a huge boom in the population of Earth. And so they were pretty much, close to 90 million in the population. And then you've got your Gen Xers and Gen Y. So the Gen Xers are pretty much from your early to mid-30s up to your 50-year-olds, and then your Gen Ys is pretty much from your 20-year-olds, maybe 30-year-olds, I can't even add, to about 20-year-olds. So 20 to about 32, 34. Now, if you were to take a snapshot of the 4 generations, and as I was preparing this talk, I found it really interesting when you compare... Is that annoying? Keep going? Okay. So I'm just hearing it. If you want to take a look at baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Y, here is a snapshot, but I've left off that thing, so I'll just read it to you. So the first one is role models. Who they had as role models. So baby boomers were the men of character. Gen X, men and women of character, can I just say? And Gen Y, what is character? Television. We've got I Love Lucy. I grew up with Happy Days. Generation Y has grown up with Jerry Springer. Need I say more? Musical icons. Who's the Beatles? Who's the Beatles in the room? There's a few baby boomers. Madonna, that's me. Yep, go the Gen Xers. And Eminem, Gen Y. And then you've got money. The baby boomers, you earn it. Gen Xers, it's not everything. So they're all about the balance. Generation Y, give it to me. Loyalty to employer. Baby boomers, work my way to the top. It was not uncommon for baby boomers to be with an organisation for 20, 30, 40 years. With the same one. Okay, Generation X, shortcut to the top. Gen Y, give me Saturday off or I'll quit. Technology, baby boomers are quite ignorant of it. Now I'm not really comfortable with it because I know a lot of baby boomers who are very comfortable with it. Gen X, we're pretty comfortable. Gen Y, they feel it in their gut. But here's a couple of other interesting ones that I found. Musical mediums. If I said to a Gen Y, what's an LP, EP or a cassette? So they obviously grew up with the digital iPods and MP3. Respect your elders. Baby boomers, it happened automatically. Gen Xers, we're polite. Gen Ys, yeah, whatever. And lastly, justice. Always prevails with baby boomers. Gen X, it's up to the courts to decide. And Gen Ys, well, if you can afford it, what is justice? Anyway, so I found it very interesting when looking at a snapshot of the comparison. Now, here's another more detailed comparison, but I'm not going to go into it, but it just shows you, which I'll unpack throughout the next, 25 minutes or so, kind of the summary of it all. So, let's start. I can safely say then that if you were to say, oh, you know what, I was just like that back in 1970 or 1980 or 1990, that statement is just simply not true. So if my mother said to me, oh, I was just like that, it's not true. And the reason for that is because there are common threads. I get that. So, I rebelled. I bet my mother did too. We have the rites of passage. I'm sure my mother did too. But the truth of the matter is the generations today are not the same. According to a CPA Australian study, 48% of Gen Ys do not believe that the Australian dream of owning their own home is even possible in their lifetime. So it's not the same. Yes, there's certain threads that are similar, but a lot of it is not the same. So let me walk you through a quick detail into each of the generations, just really quickly. Baby boomers. Who's here a baby boomer in the room? So born after 19 or between that area. Yeah, there's a few. Okay, so very low divorce rate. The first generation to live miles from extended family. In fact, I grew up with my grandparents living with us, so that was not uncommon in those days. Family size was slightly smaller than their pre-generation. Few grandparents live in the home. Mums stayed at home predominantly, so there was no daycare. Who here didn't go to daycare as a kid? Yeah, okay, interesting. And the perception of the world was safe. Their core values were very interesting as well. So, they grew up feeling, they definitely had a team spirit and they definitely had a work ethic. That's definitely one thing. Who remembers? I don't remember. I'm too young. But who actually remembers some of these growing up? Okay, interesting. Baby boomers' first computer. Interesting. Now, this is interesting if you're in business. One thing about the baby boomers is they had an unbelievable work ethic. It was not uncommon for a baby boomer to be seen to be working 55 to 60 hours a week. They are team orientated. They love working in groups and they hate conflict. So you think about anyone who in your workplace is aged, actually a lot of them now will be close to retirement, but say between 55 and 70, you find that some of them don't like conflict. They like to analyse things in different ways. They follow instructions well and they're very good with content. Now, if you're in marketing, I know there's a couple in the room, how do you market to the baby boomers? They're individualistic, they love customised and custom made, they like to look successful, they seek self-improvement, products and services that reach a balanced life, and they like technology, but they can see that sometimes problems can come with it. And what I find, my mum's a baby boomer, and it's funny because every time as I was working through this presentation, I'm thinking about her in certain moments. But, she likes technology, but she likes it in a way that she can understand, and that's it. It's like, I know how to text message, that's it. I don't want to know anything else. I know how to check my Facebook and update a status, but I don't want to know anything else. Mum, you've got another... No, that's it. I just want to know what I want, what I need. Does that make sense? So then they like it, but they can also see a problem with them. Now, okay, the late veterans and early baby boomers gave birth to us, me, the Gen Xers, and we were born between 65 and 82. I was in 1978, but those numbers can be a little bit skewed. Sometimes people say up to 78, or anyway, it's kind of in that time frame. We're the lost generation. This is when our families moved, so a lot of people moved away, with their children. We are half the size of the baby boomers, so we are about the 41 million mark. So, but in saying that, these are US figures. Yes, it has to be because we're only 12 and a half. Yeah, these were US figures. So these are a snapshot of a US study. Now, in saying that, we were the generation that had parents divorce. We were the generation where we grew up with I remember a girl in our class who was raised by a single mum, and it was so, not taboo, but it was very, it was almost like it was unheard, but then all of a sudden, growing up through high school, it became so much more prevalent in my childhood. This was the prevalence of what they call latchkey children. Latchkey children were those children that used to go home at the end of a school day, but there was no parent at home usually. Because this is the generation, definitely my parents' generation, my generation with my parents, where I'd come home, my parents would be both working, but we had grandparents at the time. But this is that's what they call the latchkey children. Family size was smaller. This is where the world became unsafe. And what's interesting is this is the generation that had not a lot of parental input in their growing up. Now, obviously, this is a very generalised thing. It doesn't have to be necessarily for you, but the one thing about the Gen Xers is due to the latchkey, they developed strong independence and strong core values around knowing what they wanted and knowing how to get it. And you'll see that as it actually unpacks a little bit more. Okay, first computers. I had the digital, if that's digital, I remember that calculator. And the cell phone. Okay, now, as a Gen X, we learnt by doing things. So we were very task-orientated. We were fast, self-paced, independent learners. Once again, going back to latchkey children, they want to have fun while they learn. Informal learning environments were best. We don't necessarily like group work, once again, given the nature of how we learned, and they want feedback from teachers. This is just a general snapshot of how we learn. Now, what's interesting is if you were to take a look at staff, if you're in a workplace right now, a lot of staff and faculties are made up predominantly of Gen Xers. Gen Ys, but predominantly Gen Xers. So anything from about 33 right up to the 50 age bracket. And within a staff or faculty, this is really important because if you're dealing with people in a workplace, depending on their generation and their personality will determine how they work and what positive feedback you can give them to really get the most out of the efficiency. So they like a work-life balance. Most of these people are now obviously parents or even early grandparents. They think globally, seek independence. They definitely didn't want the baby boomers' work ethic, because, I don't know about you, but I saw my parents work ridiculously long hours, very long laborious hours, and so our actual generation has come to realise that yes, working hard is a given, but we don't want to work as much as what our former generation did. Communication is important. We like to see our peers as friends, not as authority figures. They have loyalty to people, not necessarily companies. And I can tell you that for a fact from myself. I don't know how you feel, but as a Gen X, I remember when I made the decision to walk away from teaching, the biggest thing that was holding me back was my immediate boss, who I absolutely had so much loyalty to, way more than the school. And that was harder for me to leave than the actual, school itself. So that's just interesting. So, moving on. Welcome to the Y generation. So what happened now was the children of the baby boomers and the children were bred these children, the Gen Ys. Now this is really important. We call them the millennial generation, or as some of the readings I saw, the me-lennial generation. Very egotistical. But here's what's interesting. They number almost closely to the number of baby boomers. So they are predict about, once again, this is a US figure, but 81 million. Now, why is that important? The baby boomers are now encroaching on retirement. So the fact that we've got a large cohort of Gen Ys coming through is a vital segment of the workforce that will then support the baby boomers as they go into retirement. Does that make sense? So it's a really, really critical group. Okay. Who's a Gen Y in the room? There's a few. I'm kind of border. Yeah, Mike, you're a double Gen Y. You don't count. Okay, so there's a few Gen Ys in the room. So welcome to the age of instant messaging, instant downloads, technology, Snapchat. I don't even know half the stuff that I get told every day. You guys were into your CDs and even iPods. This is stuff that I just missed growing up. But Gen Ys, it's always been there. And what's interesting, as a teacher, from when I started teaching back in 2000, I was 21 years of age, fresh out of uni. I was only 3.5 years older than my elder students in the class. I always felt like a student. But I remember teaching then, and I remember teaching recently, and just the change in how we had to teach because of the change in the generation and how they learn. It was just a remarkable thing. But here's what's interesting. The school experiences of these children, and I call them children because they're so young, these days there are many choices of schools. When I grew up, it was either your local public school or your local Catholic private school. They're the only two choices. Now, from my experience, my son, we are moving house, building and moving an entirely new area just to get my son into the school that I need him to get into. It's not just the local school will do anymore. These days, the choices of schools are amazing. You've got selective schools, you've got sports schools, performing arts schools, private schools, public schools, GPA schools. Their schools are endless. They've got so much choice. This is the generation of school uniforms. Child safety, standardized testing. I never had an app plan. And they've had so much standardized testing, it's unbelievable. Very goal-orientated, very outcome-based education. The whole change of the Australian curriculum is all about outcome-based, and these kids they're part of that process. These children are very worldly orientated, and that's probably because of the experiences that they've had online through the internet and everything that's happening around them. With the advent of the internet, the world's become a very small place. And I can tell you now, my sons know things about the world that I still have to go back and go, really? I'll go Google that. I'm not really sure, but okay, I'll believe you. They're very worldly. And my son can tell you just about every major thing in every major city in the world. And it's just incredible. This is the generation of diversity acceptance. They accept being different. If you were different in my generation, you were almost ostracized. It's really bizarre, but you were. Now they embrace difference. They embrace change. Classroom become mainstream. Don't worry about that. That just means that, once upon a time you had gifted and talented classes, you had your normal classes, you had your special classes. Now it's all mixed into one bag. Unbelievable. And everything is 24/7 available. They learn differently. They learn a skill, not just rote learn. Who remembers going through uni or school, rote learning things? I rote learned everything. Now, I can see a difference in the way my son learns versus the way I learn. So, for example, who remembers learning how to read? It's a long time ago, and practicing phonetics. If I said to you TH, what sound does that make? What about SH? Right. That's how I learned to read and to identify words, is by blending the sounds. These days, it's all about skill development. You see the word THE, that pattern, it's the. But then you ask the students to look at the word THAT, they don't know how to say it. It's THAT. Does that make sense? So they're teaching them sight words. How many sight words can you read off by heart? A skill, but they're not teaching them rote learning by phonetics. It's just that's a small example of just changes. One thing I can tell you with being as a teacher, being in teaching, if the class wasn't fun and engaging, kids just don't rock up. It's not about productivity is the key. How much can they get through if it's fun? Not just rocking up. Rocking up is not enough. And the biggest challenge we had in the last few years whilst I was still teaching is, how do we keep kids in class and engaged? I'm like, are you kidding? You just tell them to come. No, not good enough anymore. I mean, it's just unbelievable. They want instant gratification and frequent rewards. Why do you think they want instant gratification? What are they so used to? Things immediately. Instant messaging, instant text, instant email, instant. There's none of this, I need to send a letter or a message to my mother, just think about that. How did we used to send messages or pen pals? I mean, I had a pen pal in Germany who came out here on exchange. You'd write a letter, you post it, put a stamp on it, wait 3.5 weeks, and then hope it gets there and wait for a response if it ever arrives. Now it's like you pick up the phone, how's it going? 2 seconds, you got a response. I mean, it's just amazing. This is what the millennials grew up with and have grown up and continue to grow up with it. Not to mention technology in school. They are the most technologically savvy of all generations. What's interesting is students almost expect schools now to have technology implemented. It's almost like, how can you not? I remember not even being able to teach out of a textbook anymore. It all had to be, I was just having this conversation with my sister. When I started teaching, all the boards were blackboards. And I remember when my lab got a whiteboard, I was like, I've got a whiteboard, oh my God. Now it's all smart boards. And every lesson, in fact, it's built into the National Australian Curriculum. Each lesson or each component of study has to have a certain element of technology built into it. It's just a time. They are, at the very least, communication has to occur via email. They have to have online resources, PowerPoint, And this is a big challenge with a lot of teaching and like colleges, is how do we incorporate the balance of teaching philosophies with technology. But I think they're doing all right now. Their idea of computer technology, and what's interesting is they are part of what we call the information age mindset. Now I've got some notes to go with this, so I better read it. Where are we? Slide 25. Okay. Yeah. All right. This generation seriously took for granted the amount of availability of technology that they actually had. And what's really interesting is professionals who are Gen Y. So we're talking, 20s to early 30s. These people who are professionals out there in the workplace, they never remembered a time in their life without some level of technology. They rely on it for socializing. They rely on it for shopping. They rely on it to search employers. They rely on it to provide feedback of their CV, for example, like LinkedIn. I mean, their entire life is governed by a technological platform. It's just unbelievable. And obviously, with the information age, they don't have a strong tolerance for delays. And I see that in my son, my elder son, Anthony. He'd sit there, he'd upload a page, and it's like, come on! I'm like, just be patient. Like, and he starts clicking, like, that doesn't make it go any faster. Once again, it's that instant message right at your fingertips. This is what's interesting. Generation Y are also called the tethered generation. This generation, unlike the Gen Xers and unlike the baby boomers, this is the generation that had such a strong connection to their parents because of the availability of 24/7 communication with them. So it's not unlikely for a Gen Y to text or instant message or call or email their parent multiple times a day. They've always had that line of communication open. And as a result, a new type of parenting has come about. It's called the helicopter parenting, because they hovered over their children, over everything that they do. If there's a problem at school, don't worry, mummy will be there to fix it, or dad will be there. If there's an implication at work, don't worry, we'll figure it. Parents had a very strong and continue to have a very strong input into the children of the Gen Ys, which is really interesting. Keep going. Okay, now, we don't have to agree, however, we must strive to understand the different mindsets and how each group sees the world based on their experiences. Now, what I want to share with you in the last few slides is, how do we embrace Gen Ys? When I'm out there in my line of work today in consulting, and I'm speaking to a lot of people who own their own business, or they're, in heads of business, senior management, it's like the biggest issue they have is not only attracting Gen Ys, that's one thing, retaining Gen Ys is another thing. And I see it every day. So what I want to share with you, based on a couple of studies that I looked at, based on just some practical experiences that I've had out there in observing what's happening in the marketplace, I just want to share with you some things that are some myths and facts of how people perceive Gen Ys to be, especially in the business and the workplace landscape. All right, here we go. Now, I better preface this properly. There was a study done by Robert Half International and Yahoo, which is a very big organisation. And what they did was they took a national survey of more than 1,000 adults in 2008, and these adults ranged between 21 and 28. And they found some very interesting studies and findings. There's 3 myths I want to share with you just in the next couple of minutes. Myth 1. This generation slacks off at work to take care of personal matters. Who here thinks that might be, who here has witnessed something that say, yeah man, that is so true, I've seen that happen with okay. The fact is, 73%, this is based on this study by Robert Half International 2008, Yahoo, 1,000 people, 73% worry about balancing professional and personal obligations. Now this is what's interesting. Generation Y, who were their parents? Mainly baby boomers. And baby boomers worked probably the most out of any generation. 55 to 60 hours was a norm. So they saw parents whose life was so out of balance, and they did not want that. What they want is the balance of life, work, and enriching values. They assumed they can have it, and they assume they can get it, but where they are lacking is in the how-to. Does that make sense? And so what happens is they turn to companies and they turn to management, and they expect the management to be able to guide them through that process. And so often what seems to be that they're slacking off, no they're not, they're just trying to find that balance. And often they turn to that sort of level to try and find it. Myth 2. Generation Y workers can't take direction. Okay, fact. They want frequent communication with their boss. Why do you think they crave frequent communication?
They've been texted 100 times throughout the day by their parents.
Thank you. Tethering. Just like you tether with tethering. They're the tethered generation. Generation Y have become so accustomed to hearing continual feedback, critiqued by their parents. They almost expect it from their management. And if you're a manager, don't wait for that once or twice a year to give feedback. They almost expect it daily. Now, that is seriously hard work if you're in that position, but just take a snapshot, all right, if not daily, critique where critique is necessary. Does that make sense? So communication is big for them. It's huge for them. Myth number 3, Gen Y employees have a sense of entitlement and don't want to pay their dues. Fact, they expect to pay their dues, but in different ways. So Gen Ys, they almost feel like, yes, I deserve that raise, or yes, I deserve that position, but they believe it's not just putting in extra work. They believe I've paid my dues in things like extra education, going back and doing some further study. They don't believe that if I just do more work, I expect to get a better raise. For them, it's about what can I contribute through my skill set, my professional development back to the company. And that, for me, is my idea of paying due to you. Does that make sense? So very interesting in the change of dynamic and the change of thinking. Now, if you're an employer, as I come to the last couple of slides, here's what they want. Millennials want the ability to work whenever and wherever they want, variation on the job, continual feedback from supervisors. They love to have you keep score, not physical score. I mean, don't forget, this is the generation that grew up with everything being tested. NAP plan testing, standardized testing, entrance level testings. I mean, they are tested. So they expect not just a once a year appraisal. It's, well, give me some, how am I going, boss? They want feedback. And they like to have spot reviews on tasks and projects. They like to be given opportunities to learn, retool and reinvent themselves. And it's interesting because as I speak to people who are close to me, who are Gen Ys, who are looking to make a move from one company to another, I often ask them why. And it's either, I've just outgrown this place. There's nothing more for me to grow, or there's nothing more for me to do. There's no more opportunity. I've become stagnant. It's become boring. These are some things that I'm hearing from Gen Ys in the marketplace. Well, I've got some people smiling. What's interesting, Gen Ys like opportunities such as training programs, tuition reimbursement. So if they're going to go out and do extra study, if you're prepared to pay for that, that's something that will buy loyalty in that person into your company. Membership fees, professional associations. Okay, and here's another thing. If you can provide concrete examples during the interview process of how you as a company and as a director have done that with other people in that company or other Gen Ys, that will definitely cement in their mind the opportunities for growth, not just past the next 12 months. Does that make sense? The other thing they like, what have I got here? Mentoring. Challenge new problems, continual feedback. I did say that, didn't I? Mentoring is a big one. They love to be given an opportunity to stretch their wings, but also be guided in that same process. Continuing on with the theme. Okay. The one thing with Gen Ys, to retain them, this generation is definitely not the generation that I grew up in. When I grew up, if you were in the presence of an adult, you be quiet. You're seen, but you are not heard. You're seen, but you are not heard. Not the Gen Ys. The Gen Ys have a voice. They have an opinion. And it's funny because this is the generation that grew up with parents who also gave them feedback and opened their feedback. So it's a two-way channel. So they want respect, but they want straight talk. None of this fluff stuff. Just give it to me straight. They expect honesty and candor from their managers, which is really interesting. They like to walk the talk. So I'm just probably skipping a few here, but walk the talk. So Generation Y is not a generation that stands still. They like flexibility, they like change, and they're quick to adapt to it. So if you are a company and you are struggling to retain Generation Ys after 12 months, then you've got to ask yourself, what can I put into place that will entice them to stay? Now, let me tell you one thing. One thing that doesn't work with them necessarily is just money. What they want is money, benefits and growth opportunities. That's one thing that will buy you a Generation Y in helping them to retain. And the other thing is also amount of freedom and flexibility. They love to be able to remote work from home. How many Gen Ys do you know, yes, I'm working from home tomorrow? I mean, that's just something that they love to do as an option and as a flexible thing. Okay. Communicate with Ys. Really quickly. Paint pictures with words. Use action verbs. So don't fluff too much. Just get to the point once again. Don't talk down to them. Remember, they grew up with parents who saw them almost as equals, not authority. Show respect. Use email, voicemail, text, visual communication. Constantly seek their feedback. Use humour. Encourage them to explore new options. And lastly, teamwork Y style. Now, this is what's interesting. Most people think that Gen Ys, because they're so connected, they prefer to do all lines of communication via email or text. But in fact, it's not true. This generation definitely thrives on being social. And I saw that as I moved into my late 30s, and I saw teachers in their early 20s, man, they were out every Friday night, every Saturday. I'm like, how are you bothered? But they love being socially connected to their peers within a workplace. So the question is, if you are in a workplace and you manage a workplace, the one thing that you can definitely assure is if you've got an opportunity where Gen Ys can openly face-to-face communicate, and you've set up avenues where that can happen, and you've set up avenues of social time, that's something they really respond well to from that particular point of view. The other thing, so staff gatherings, mix well with others, social events, don't patronise them. I can tell you one thing with students, oh my God, when I went into teaching at a very young age, I was almost teaching Gen Xers, early Gen Ys, and there was so much level of respect. Towards the end of my teaching years, it's amazing. They almost expect you to be on their peer. They didn't quite get, that you are up here and they're down there as far as respect. But it's definitely a generation where you do not patronise. They earn respect. They give respect. It's not they'll give when they'll earn. It's just an unbelievable dynamic. So I hope that's enough meat, because that's all I've got for you for tonight. Think about that if you are in the managerial position, and more importantly, think about that if you are in a Gen Y position, because obviously that's some light shed